So hi, everybody. I'm Michael Munson with Forge, and I'm going to be a little bit of a host tonight, kind of gently asking some questions and inviting Jennifer and Cameron and Travis to respond, and we'll play off of each other, and we will have a really good evening of conversation about grief and some of the stuff that's happening in the world that's really difficult. I just wanted to start us off with a couple of pieces of housekeeping. The first is just to really acknowledge the land that we're on, and I know that we're all in different places. Right now I'm up in Sturgeon Bay, and that is the sacred land of the Menominee people, and I'm sitting about 50 yards from Lake Michigan. So I am really grateful to be on this borrowed land. And if folks can just take a few seconds and get in touch with where you are in this world, where you're sitting, where you're standing, where you're being. Thank you. And for visual access, just to give you a snap of what I look like, I'm a white appearing kind of round person with glasses, used to be darker hair and darker beard, and it's now graying, and I've got a black shirt on, and whenever I'm at our family's cottage, I always apologize for what's behind me, which is a bunch of arrowheads, but it's my grandfather's, and at that point in time, he didn't know that it probably wasn't so cool to do. So that's what's behind me. And just to do a couple of other housekeeping things, again, ASL is there, closed captioning is there. If you have any challenges or questions with technology, Caleb from Forge's staff is on the back end, and you can feel free to chat with him and let him know if you've got a challenge or a problem that he will probably very easily fix. So we are recording tonight, and again, we're going to have a casual conversation. So welcome, everybody, and welcome especially Jennifer and Travis and Cameron. I'm wondering if we could start with just a really easy, who are you? Name, pronoun, your affiliation, and kind of what brings you to this topic tonight. And we'll do like maybe the 2 or 3 sentence short paragraph to start us off, and that'll give us a better idea than if I shared with folks who you all are. Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to start. I'm Travis Trott. He, him pronouns. I'm here in Milwaukee. I am a psychotherapist working here in Milwaukee with a group practice called Therapies East Associates. And I work primarily with LGBTQ folk in the area and all over Wisconsin, actually. The thing that brings me here is, well, number one, because Michael asked me, and when Michael asks, I do. But also, as a therapist, much of therapy is about grief. And it's about coping with grief and moving through grief. Yeah, it seems like a really natural topic for me to be talking about.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Cameron. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the executive pastor at Zao MKE Church. I'm also a social worker and now professor. So I have a lot of, roles and hats that I hold professionally anyway, but, I'm a Black trans man who has walked this world in many different ways, experiencing many different types of grief and figuring out ways to hold that grief collectively in spaces like churches and, together in collectives and groups. And so that's definitely part of when similarly as what Travis said, when Michael asks, I always try to say yes. And I think that it's important for us to have these kind of discussions because I know that if we aren't figuring out ways to heal together, we will continue to hurt together. And so let's have this convo, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I'm Jennifer Nordstrom. Pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister. What is a Unitarian Universalist minister? That's a longer conversation. Let's say the shorthand is one source, one ending. I serve a congregation here in Milwaukee. It's the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. Unitarian Universalism is one of the first denominations in the country to be explicitly welcoming and affirming of LGBTQ folks. Started ordaining queer ministers in the 80s. So it's great. I'm grateful to be here to have this conversation with you. I think I'm coming at grief from the place of a pastor's heart of serving my people who are certainly grieving right now. And also having had my own experiences of grief and knowing it from the inside as well as the out. So that's where I'm coming from in this conversation. Thank you, Michael, for having me. It's always an honor to be invited.
Beautiful. Thank you, everybody. And just to frame our conversation, so we've all mentioned grief, and our world is really hard right now. And I think a lot of us are touched in different ways by what's hard. Anti-trans stuff going on, the war going on, lots of things going on, racism, ableism, all of these things that are happening. So many of us are touched by grief in a lot of different ways. Some of us just in a little bit, and some of us really overwhelmed by it. So our conversation tonight, I do hope that if people need to have some space, need to leave for a little bit, we're recording. So, I think we all know that this might be a sensitive subject, even though we're really hoping to have some constructive conversation and some healing conversation in the time that we have together. So we have a list of questions which we can stick to or not stick to, but let me pose the first question, and if we go from there, we go from there, and we'll find a way around. So in your work, and all three of you do different kinds of work, and in your world, what have you seen as the issues that people are struggling with the most these days? So what are the challenges? What are the rapidly emerging things that are happening one after another with all of us? What are you seeing?
Go ahead, Cameron.
I was just gonna get it going. Okay. I think one of the things that whether or not we're able to articulate it, we all went through a global trauma, and we're all continuing to have to deal with COVID-19 and the many effects that is having. And I know for me, as I continue to try to create community, it is really hard to do things that maybe at one point we had to do, like talk to people, and like have conversations and go outside and be in air with one another again. And I think that is something that we have yet to truly, as like a collective unit of the human race, say like, wow, that was hard, that changed everything, and where has my last 2 years gone? And for some of us, this was a moment to be kind of by ourselves and figure out who we are, and that came with a lot of like good things. But for others, I think it became an isolated moment where they had no one supporting them, and now coming out having to just act as if nothing ever happened when it did. And so, and then, finally, like as a Black person in this space, during the pandemic, also having to contend with the pandemic of racism that has always been around the United States anyway, and having to contend with with those kind of things happening at the same time, I know we're talking about grief, but like I grieve the losses of people like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and right. And so I think there was just a lot happening all at one time, and so many people that I know are still trying to figure out how to kind of handle and deal with all that happened in the last 2 years. So that's what I think I mostly see.
Thank you. And if I could just add a tiny little bit, Cameron, one of the reasons that I really thought about you for this panel was because of all the work that you did around George Floyd and around a lot of those things that were, it feels like they were forever ago, but just like yesterday, but all of the mutual aid you did and all of the literally being on the streets. So I know you bring that perspective forward, and that's another thing that was really hard, and not everybody can do that. And I'm really grateful that you were one of those people to be there at that point in time. Yeah, thank you.
I think overwhelm is one of the currents that I'm noticing really clearly in the folks that I serve. From what Cameron was saying, the pandemic of racism, the pandemic itself, fears about the future of our democracy and fascism and creeping fascism and what that means for all of us, and especially like queer folks and trans folks. What does that mean in terms of safety, fear that's being connected there? Lots of people struggling with isolation, and the way that the fear and anxiety have worked. Cameron talked about trauma. Any one of us who has experienced trauma in the past, a new trauma, a collective one or individual ones, it touches on all the old ones, right? So it's like a nerve that gets touched, and then the body is like alert and ready to respond in the moment with a fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn, or whatever it is, except that the current moment is not the previous one in which we experienced that trauma. And one of the things that I have been noticing, so what usually happens is that we experience our traumas individually or in a small group, right? A small community. The whole world went through this collective trauma at the same time. And so everyone's resources are depleted simultaneously, some worse than others. And at the same time, everybody's resource stack just went down. One of the things that I was thinking about in the community that I serve is, so there's an individual body that experienced this trauma. There's also a collective body. So what does it mean for the community body, the body as a whole, the body of the people to have experienced this trauma? And what does it mean to try to heal a community, heal the whole body, rather than individual bodies one at a time? And where do the fault lines run in the collective body?
Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm just building on what's already been said, right? And said so beautifully. I would even, this is just in my mind, the date is 2015 with Ferguson. Like this is where this stuff starts, the killing of Michael Brown, and then the Me Too movement and the election of Donald Trump, and then pandemic and George Floyd. I feel like I'm missing some too, right? And then like an ever-growing awareness and urgency of the climate crisis, and starting to see climate refugees from all over the world starting to move, right? Move in mass quantities, mass numbers. Like all of that just creates like just a daily ambient tension and like fieriness in the body, like Jennifer was saying, right? Like our nervous systems are always on alert. They're like up here all the time now. But I want to add from my view too, that when people come into my office and talk, they're talking about all of that, and they're talking about the things that would be challenging on a good day and in a perfect world, right? Like how do I get along with my family, right? Or like, how do I come out? How do I start my transition? How do I continue my transition? These like really like just kind of like everyday things. Like how do I do a conflict with my boss? Again, really challenging in even the best of times, and then add on this layer um, and kind of like a mass confusion, and it's that yeah. So people are still talking about the very personal stuff, the very daily stuff, and they're doing it in this context of seeming chaos and incredible change and incredible shifting. And I think we read in the news too about this great shifting, right? Like the Great Resignation, or whatever the news is calling these kinds of movements. And like I'm sure I'm not the only one here, but like I feel like we're seeing that, right? Like I'm seeing my clients move, and the new clients that I'm taking on have just moved to Milwaukee from other places. And there's all this shifting happening all the time, which is, again, that's, even if it's a good shift towards something really good, that's still really hard. And new things need to be figured out in new ways. And there's grief there too, right? There's loss and transition.
Excellent, thank you. So I've heard a lot of things come up that are related to the next question that we had tentatively talked about doing, which is kind of like, what's the impact? And I know I've heard things about our heightened, nervous systems and the fear that a lot of us are feeling, the sense of safety or the loss of safety, the isolation, the overwhelm, all of this stuff. So if we dug a little bit deeper into that, what impact do you think these current events or these old events, because it sounds like for a lot of you and a lot of us, what's happened in 2015 is still a current event, even though it was 7 years ago. So how do those things play out for you in the work that you're doing, the people that you're working with?
So I just want to connect a little bit of what Travis just said with what you just asked, Michael. The piece about the stuff that would be hard on a good day, right? What I am seeing is that folks are the big stuff is connected with the little stuff, and people are just maxed out, and like folks are sort of, there's a disproportionate response to stimuli based on people's nervous systems being maxed out. And I keep saying again and again that that's normal. And I want to say it here, right? Like the heightened response, the disproportionate response is completely understandable when your nervous system's already off the charts. And so one of the tools that I keep trying to return to with my congregation and with my fellow ministers is the tools that we know to ground the nervous system and to calm our nervous systems down. And they are the same tools that have been there for millennia. We know them. It's about the body. It's about the breath. It's about reconnecting and stopping the dissociation, using the breath to calm the nervous system down. And it's community. That's the other piece, right? One of the ways that the body knows that it's safe is if it's in community with other people that it trusts, moving in safe ways. And so we try to do communal movement as much as possible, because these really are it's a body-brain connection, and I really think that we need to be working on both levels.
And I so want to listen, but I so want to like just a little teeny bit of ad, which is, like what you're talking about is like the 90-10 response kind of thing where, it's really a 10% thing, but your response is 90%. And I, Jennifer, if I can ask you a follow-up question with like what Cameron was talking about, like, how do we be together in the air? Like we've been inside. And so if healing comes through community, what does community look like now versus what did it look like 5 years ago? And, it's a rhetorical question, but I would love to hear your answer if you have one, because I think that, it's so right on is how, we can breathe by ourselves, but how do we be in community when our world is different now than it was?
Yeah, I mean, it is a rhetorical question, Michael. Let's just say that. I'll tell you what we're doing. But it's what I recognize is that sometimes even being inside, in space, in air with other people feels dangerous to people's nervous systems at this point. And so the things that would have been easy, safe tools to return to are now dicier. They're just more complicated. And in our congregation, we're continuing to wear masks and we sing, right? And so singing is a risky behavior. Masks mitigate it. We try to balance those things. And the other piece that is particular to my position is doing the theological work, which is to say, we are fundamentally interconnected and there's no such thing as eliminating that connection. And so we are connected through our breath, which is a terrifying thing. Like, our fundamental interconnection is always terrifying. It's extra terrifying right now, but it is the truth. We cannot separate ourselves out and have like me be safe and you be vulnerable, because that's not real. We are vulnerable together. And so understanding theologically the reality that we are interconnected and we cannot be unconnected. And anything that we do to try to unconnect ourselves is probably a false, an illusion, a way to delude ourselves into a sense of safety.
Thank you for answering, even though, yeah, thank you. Travis or Cameron, what are the impacts that you're seeing? How's it different? What's going on?
Yeah, I think I'm definitely seeing that. I think it relates to what Jennifer's saying. I'm not exactly sure how, but like I work with a lot of like really caring and sensitive people who are like really sensitive to suffering and pain and like want to be there for their friends. They're feeling really, really tired. And I sit with somebody and I say, hey, you've got this like great community. Yeah, I know you have like so many friends. Like, have you thought about reaching out? And they say, well, they're tired too. They're maxed out too. I see it in them, right? Because people aren't stupid. They're they see the faces and they see the tiredness and they hear about it, and so they go, how could I possibly reach out when they need help too? And that's I never feel like I have a satisfying answer for that, because that's a real reality, right? That's so it's the impact of all this is like, not only am I tired, but I know that everybody else is tired. And and that can really trigger a lot of, this, I don't want to bother people. I don't want to overburden people, which again, like on a good day, a lot of people struggle with. But particularly now when I know that somebody is going through X, Y, and Z, or this is how they've been responding, that I couldn't possibly reach out to them. And maybe even a guilt that they couldn't reach out to me. Like, what if somebody asked me for help and I felt like I couldn't give it because I'm trying to stay afloat here. That's a really tough one. And so I think that's kind of the impact that comes to my mind, right? Which is total sign of burnout. That's a sign of trauma response and burnout, being maxed out.
Yeah, I just want to yes, that is where I feel like everyone is at. It's just this desire to care for one another, but know that we can't. And I think for the first time, I'm seeing people actually put up boundaries and say, I can't. And we were never able to say that before for some reason, which, you go to therapy and you hope that your therapist can like get you there. But like, you don't. And for the first time, people are being like, no, like, I'm done. I've reevaluated my whole life because we almost all collectively died, and I don't have time for this anymore. And so like, no. And I think that's a really good thing. I think that's a healthy thing that has come out. And what is happening, I'm about to go in on some things, but like, capitalism can't run that way if we keep doing that, right? And so I'm a person who believes that we're being worked like more than we should have, and people are recognizing that. And so people are starting to put up boundaries, and we're starting to hear these things like, oh, nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody wants to, you know, whatever. And it's like, no, people are finally like getting healthy in a way to say, this wasn't good for me and I'm done with that. And so for me, I feel like there's a lot of impacts then of walking people through big life transitions when they've been, you know, in a job for 7 to 8 years and they said, I've been being just mishandled in my job and I'm done with it. And now I don't have an income and I don't have gas money to get anywhere, but I feel awesome, right? And I'm like, yeah. So like, how collectively now can our community come around you and figure out how to help you figure out what you do need and how you want to proceed forward? And some of those folks are like, I'm moving to California or I'm moving wherever, and that's great too, right? So I just think that there's been lots of impacts in that kind of way of walking with people, trying to figure out these big life questions that I think a lot of us had during the pandemic of like, I don't want to live in this same way anymore. Like there is something greater than just like going to my 9-to-5 job and hating every day of that. And then it is this thing of also not knowing how to ask for that help, like Travis was just saying, and therefore having a really hard time connecting to one another and not wanting to show up in spaces to have that connection because we are out of practice, or we've determined that it was that it might not be healthy, or it would be healthy, but we don't know how. And so, yeah, I think that there's lots of impacts that are happening. Some of them are really good. And some of them do come then with like risk and consequences, which, you know, to Jennifer's point again, is really important for all of us to figure out then how to collectively have each other's backs when we make those big decisions.
Can I just pull a little bit on the thread of hope that I felt like Cameron just started stitching? So yes, I'm absolutely seeing that as well. That people are saying no and setting these boundaries around, I can't do that. That doesn't work for me, which I do think I agree is really healthy. But to come back to Travis's question around like showing up for one another, the no around the stuff that isn't helpful is painful, is exploitative in capitalism, empowers the yes for the really nurturing, juicy, good, relational, connected stuff. So I'm seeing more and more no's in my people for the stuff that's not working for them, including, you know, at the church. And the things that they're saying no to are creating more space for the big, juicy, exciting yes. Sometimes at the church and sometimes somewhere else. And so part of the discernment work is about not just like what isn't working, what feels horrible and is dragging my soul through the mud, but also like, where do I feel a little bit of joy? Where do I start to feel sparkly and tingly and like awake, like, ooh, there's something expanding and connective here, and to follow that thread forward. And I do think that there's a lot of yes in personal relationships with people that we love. So there ends up sometimes being more left, like saying yes to somebody who's really struggling can feel empowering and enlivening. Like if a friend calls me and I pick up the phone and I'm feeling depleted and exhausted and they just want to talk about something on their heart, sometimes at the end of that conversation, I feel more awake and alive because I've connected with my friend and I feel hopeful and I feel a sense of purpose and I feel possibility in the world again. And so I think those relational connections, even if they seem like they'll take time or they'll take energy, they end up giving as well.
You know, as I was listening to all of you, I was thinking about how, you know, we are all tired, right? We are tired just like everybody else is tired. And our roles have likely changed. I know like my role in my work has changed, and I've heard a little bits of pieces from each of you that your work has probably changed as well, at least how you're doing your work or how it looks. And I was thinking about this concept of collectiveness and this concept of hierarchy, where I think a lot of times, well, therapists used to be like up here and clients are down here, or pastors are up here and congregants are down here. And we might not believe that, but that's what other people kind of hold. And if we're moving, it sounds like, and I think a lot of us are moving from that hierarchy state to a collective state. What does that look like? Does it mean that we as the helpers don't always have to be in that role? How does it work to create community or create collectiveness? And that can be rhetorical too, just,
Yeah, I do think it's that. I especially, in my vision, in my imagining, projecting out into the future, like we are facing a climate changed future. All of the crumbling, the pieces of the systems that are crumbling, climate change is going to hit those blocks pretty hard, and the crumble and I think that future looks very different than the past that we have come from. And in that future, I want more people to be equipped to do shared ministry with one another. And so part of my work is to equip as many people as possible to be able to do the ministry with one another, so that they can hold one another into that future. And also right now, I mean, we train people to do pastoral care with one another. We train people to lead worship as lay leaders. And I think that is, I mean, that's specific to the church, but that is part of what I feel like I'm doing, is trying to train and equip as many people as possible to do the work of helping and leading and loving and sharing. What the word I would use is ministry, but somebody else might use just like caring work or support work.
Yeah, and I think for me, again, I'm in a church as well, and one of our kind of tenets are we're Jesus rooted, justice centered, and radically inclusive, right? And I can run you through what all those mean, but I won't do that. But the last one is radically inclusive, and what that truly means is we hold up the most marginalized first, right? And we make all of our decisions because and with that person in mind. And so I think when we're talking about collective future, that is what we as a collective people have to get to make a collective future. Because what we're doing right now is we're separating each other out and deciding who is worthy of water, who is worthy of, land, who is worthy of help and care and love, right? That's what we're doing. And instead, if we could do the opposite and hold up the most marginalized first, we then all become free. And I think that is my hope and my idea for, at Zao, we have a huge leadership team. Jonah, who's the other pastor, also my spouse, we do a lot of visioning, but nothing we do happens without other people. And, I think that the reason that we have so many mutual aid things, we just opened up, by the way, I hope everybody has heard, we just opened up the trans clothing boutique, right? Where it is a mutual aid thing. People are dropping off clothes, we sort them, we clean them, we label them, we put them all over, and any person who's in need of affirming clothing, you come and we got you. And if you can bring nothing, great, you just show up and we got you, right? And because we know that we have people in the community that are going to continue to feed and source this thing so that you have what you need. And I think that that's the kind of collective visioning that we can do, the collective just living that we can do. You mentioned, when George Floyd was murdered by the police, we opened up our building. It became a drop-in distribution center for protest supplies. working with lots of awesome community members who, again, it was a mutual aid thing. You came in, you got what you needed, and you went to the streets to do the good work that you're doing. And we continue to have that open today. And this is the kind of thing that people have always had to do when they're on the margins, right? So like Black people, like queer and trans folks, we've had to make different kinds of families and different kinds of like community because we're not always getting what we need. But if people could maybe step into that and say, this is how the world could be. Everyone, there is enough for all of us if we all just share. I think we could get to that kind of evening the playing field, and there is no hierarchy anymore if we lived in this kind of way. So that is a hope that I hope that we continue to do that at my church. I hope that we continue to do that as community member, maybe just even in Milwaukee, and that spreads out to be kind of a visioning for how our future could be.
This is always a challenging question for me because collective action in my work doesn't look the way it does in Jennifer and Cameron's work, right? Like there aren't groups of people present all at the same time. But sometimes I call myself like a family or group therapist that just works with one person at a time. Because we're always talking about the ways that we're connected. That is often like a primary goal of therapy, right? Like how do I be with my family? How do I be with myself? How do I be with the world, right? We're asking connecting questions and trying to make meaning out of all of that and trying to figure out how to move forward with that. And I've always sort of subscribed to these ways of doing therapy that like try to flatten the hierarchy and try to see myself as an expert in therapy, but not in the person's life. And I feel like any illusions that I had, about like that hierarchy sort of did fall apart during the pandemic, right? Suddenly, and this has been said elsewhere by people far more articulate than I am, but suddenly I was often when somebody is experiencing something and they're talking to me about it, I'm not experiencing it. And so like I have a distance, I'm able to kind of nod and empathize and do all this kind of stuff. But people were coming to me and saying, I feel really cooped up in my house and I'm afraid that I'm going to die or my loved ones are going to die. And I would go, same, right? Like I don't know what to tell you about that. Like I had no distance from it either. And so that really thrust me in a way that I had never been before into being with, right? It was a real challenge, but a really good one, right? And gave me a new appreciation for being able to say sometimes, I don't know what to do here. And maybe we can just be with each other while we don't know, which is really, really hard to do. We are problem-solving creatures and we want to take action all the time, right? Especially when things are uncomfortable and when things are not right and when things are unjust. And we've been in many places where we just feel really helpless, like we just don't know what to do. And sometimes we feel too small or too singular to tackle these like incredibly complex, huge problems, right? Where we often feel really out-resourced and out-personed. So I don't know if it flattened the hierarchy or kind of turned those things upside down, but I certainly felt able to be with my clients in a way that I hadn't been before, and hopefully I'm continuing to do, like being more willing to say, not sure, and this really sucks. Let's sit with each other while it sucks and while we're here. Yeah.
And that's really beautiful. It can be really beautiful, at least. Some of what you've all said, I'm going to ask a question that feel free, obviously, to not answer, but, how are you coping, right? Like, we're all in this big pool together, and it really sucks sometimes. And there doesn't seem to be an answer. There doesn't seem to be an end to some of what's going on. Like little things like racism and capitalism and sexism and the politics. And I mean, you're like, some of these things, they feel like they go on forever. And climate change, there's not a good end in sight, or at least a lot of times we don't feel that way. So how, if you're willing to share, how do you take care of you, refill your well, whatever metaphors you want to use for that? How do you do you?
The best I can in any given moment. This is another one where, just everyone is doing their best. Everyone is doing, even when it looks like they're doing their worst. They're in that way they're doing what they know how to do. And that includes us too, right? And so some days, there are days where I'm like, man, I really nailed it, right? I did all the things, I asked for help, I took it easy, I was really gentle with myself. And then there are days where I indulge in my vices and I do things that aren't so great for me, or that maybe even do harm, and I beat myself up about them, that, and everything in between, right? Like often it's, both of those things can happen in many times in one day. So I have not found a magic formula or any even kind of consistency in that.
That sounds human. That sounds really good. Cameron or Jennifer, are you willing to share what do you do for you to?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I know that I need people, and I don't want to need people. Let me be clear, but I know that I do need them. And so I find my people, and I find the people who are willing to, take that phone call when I need it, and to check in on me, because I'm often the check-inner, but I have people who are like, hey, but how are you though? And I think that's really important. And part of being my people, I think, are also folks who are willing to do some imagination of what could be, because that is something that holds me grounded to now, but also gives me something to push toward. And so when I'm in those like really, deep, angry places, I have this thing that I know that my people and I really care about and want to push toward, to make the world a better place. And that really helps me stay here, to have something to work for and to work toward. And I have a 15-month-old daughter now, and I want the world to be an inhabitable place for her, right? And so I know that my people, and I keep saying that because I'm finding my people, are people who want that same thing. So, and then I play a lot of guitar and sing, because that is a thing that grounds me, unlike most things can and do. And so I think for me, being able to do something creative, and some days it is to my detriment, because I should be doing all these other things, but instead I just spent 4 hours playing guitar. And in fact, I think that's actually not a bad thing. It's not a should thing. It's a thing that I needed to do. I didn't know I needed to do it until I grabbed that guitar, So I think finding creative outlets, ways to connect to other people, but also the internal stuff that just brings joy, is really important in these times.
Co-sign everything that Cameron and Travis said. I think my guitar playing is dance and yoga and body work, body movement, and meditation. When I'm at my best, I do those things. And other times I am not at my best and I slip into the vices, like Travis said. The other, in addition to the spiritual practice, I do have a daily spiritual practice of meditation and prayer that has held me through the pandemic and has been really crucial to my mental health and mental stability. But I also really believe that we are all held in a love that is larger than all of us. And that I don't have to do or be or say or fix all of it, or sometimes even any of it, that I can rest in that love that is larger than all of us, that the universe is so much bigger, infinitely larger than this moment that we're living through right now. And there have been eons of human history, let alone world history, let alone universe history. And so I can rest in the things that are larger than me and surrender to the moment.
Thank you. As I'm listening, I'm thinking about one of our questions that's a little bit farther down on the list. And, I heard each of you say something kind of like, in my good moments or in my good days, or, in an ideal way, I do this. But sometimes I do these other things. And some of that was inferred. And I was thinking about, like the other day, I haven't done this for probably 5 or 6 years. I ended up sitting on the floor in my bedroom crying because that was the only place that felt safe, against the wall. I've gotten bigger and I've gotten less flexible, but I crammed my body between the bed and the wall. And that, that was all I could do at the moment. And it was the best thing for me. It probably looked like crap and I don't really care, but it was really good for me. And I think about one of the questions that I offered to us before, which is what is it when we aren't the good client, the good congregant, the good whatever it is that we're supposed to be? And when is it okay for us to not be okay? When is it okay for us to sit in the corner and cry? When is it okay for us to have a 2-year-old temper tantrum, whether it's in the middle of the grocery store or in the middle of our bedroom? Where is there permission for that? And how do we deal with that? Is it okay? And how do we make it okay? And, all of these questions that, again, they're contingent on each other depending on, I think, what it is for folks. So you all can go wherever you want with that, but I think it's a harm reduction thing of, how do we be not okay sometimes? And we're recording this, but don't tell anybody that I just sat on the floor and, crammed my body between the wall and the bed. It happens. I didn't take pictures.
I appreciate that you gave that example, because I think if all of us were more honest with one another, we all have those moments. Mine often are in the car driving long distances while there's specific music playing and I'm not understanding why I'm bawling my eyes out, and I think that if we were, again, just honest, we all have those things. We all have those moments. And this idea of goodness, and who has determined whether you are good or not is I could talk about that for way too long, essentially, because there are so many systems that tell us that we are garbage. There are so many systems around us, again, kind of separating out who is worthy of love and goodness. And those systems, for me, are the things that need to be crushed as quickly as possible. And I'm in a way to do that crushing, and want to do that crushing. But in my world, in my church, when I look at the Bible, and I know everybody's not a Christian, but here goes some Bible things. Our story of how things were created is this, there's 2 stories, and they're not literal, this is what I believe anyway, but there are 2 stories, and one story is this big God who just is boom, 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 create, and is really powerful. And then the second story is this intimate God who goes and takes the dirt and creates humanity and breathes God's self into this dirt to create this human, and says, and looks at all of it and says, this is good, but like looks at humanity and says, you are very good. And so like, for me, I hope that we can get to a place where we can look at one another and say, like, you are very good. You are very good when you are by your bedside looking the messiest of messy. You are very good, and nobody can take that from you, because it's not for them to take. And I hope that more of us can at least remind each other of that, if not in community. We can do that better when we're with one another. But again, I hope that there are ways for each of us to just remind ourselves that, like, you are very good, and there's nobody that can tell you otherwise. And I know that that's difficult to say, but I hope that we can figure out ways to believe that for ourselves.
I would say it's actually always okay to not be okay. That it is, in fact, the appropriate response to many things. And at the same time, I live in the world too. And so, having been socialized as a woman, the thing that is not okay for me in my mind is anger, not sadness, right? So I was socialized to believe that sadness is acceptable, anger not acceptable. And so the thing that I try to, when I am in my like not okay space, it's when my grief is showing up as rage. And what that looks like for me is a lot of cursing and dismissiveness, and F this and F that and everybody and whatever and rar. And I think the place that I would put a caveat in, it's always okay to not be okay, is that it's not okay to do harm. So what I try to do, even when I'm in my I'm less comfortable with this version of not being okay, rageful self, is trying not to direct it at my loved ones, like to have it come out in at the systems that I'm furious with, or at the air, or the tree, or the refrigerator that hit me in the face.
I think in doing a lot of trauma work with people and learning a lot about trauma creates this idea of, like, I feel like it sparked something in me, the way that Jennifer and Cameron have talked about it, that the not okay, who defined that? And that came from the outside. That didn't come from you, right? Like, I don't think that we're born with this inherent, like, oh, I experienced something that's not okay. That always comes from the outside. And we learn that it's not okay. And so what we do with trauma, when things aren't safe, we break off a really sacred piece of ourselves and we hide it somewhere. It's very clever, right? We hide it, we keep it safe, to keep it from other people who want to destroy it. And that often includes really wonderful things that we experience, like anger and sadness and grief and no, and I don't like that. And I don't want that. So we learn to keep those things back from other people so that they're not punished, so they'll stop trying to get rid of them. Unfortunately, we do like too good of a job, and we hide them from ourselves as well. And we internalize that in order to keep ourselves safe, that it's not okay. So as we're thinking, I'm like, well, what does that mean to not be okay? Often what that means is I'm feeling a feeling, or I'm having an experience that other people have said that they're uncomfortable with, either in the past or even right now, right? People who say, oh, I don't want to, they give us all sorts of clues that they don't want to deal with it. So I don't know if I have like a good forward movement to what I'm saying here, but maybe it's something that we can invite ourselves into. When I say I'm not okay today, who said, and what does that mean? And like, is that an opportunity for us to hold whatever that is, right? Like, people come to me with all sorts of shame about feeling hopeless or in despair, or even these things that we're not supposed to feel, because we're supposed to feel resilient and hopeful and we're supposed to have all this pluck, right, in the face of great danger, but we don't always feel like that. And that's very human. And so how do we hold that? How do we make that a part of our whole experience?
Because I think so much is about safety, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we're all good Midwesterners where you're like, how are you? And you're like, good, fine, okay, right? But like, that's never actually telling people, how are you? And a lot of that, I think, has to do with none of us feel safe to be exactly who we are. I know that I sure don't. There's lots of reasons, and again, systemic reasons, or whatever it might be around us, telling us that we can't be who we are. Jennifer explaining, like, being socialized as a woman, you can't be angry. As a Black person, you certainly can't be angry because now we're dangerous, right? And so, like, there's all these things that push on us to tell us that we're not safe to really explain who we are and what is really going on with us. And so, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there just as you were talking, Travis, because I'm like, I wish we could figure out how to let all those pieces be. And I think with trauma work, I think we can get closer, but until we have spaces really that allow for us to have that safety, we can't fully get there. And I appreciate your work for, like, helping people get there, maybe in your office. And, like, I think we need to do work outside to then create those spaces so that, a healed person can come forth into a healed, safe space and try out what they know is true about them.
This is a place where I think we can really take a really great cue from the neurodivergence community. And when I say that, I'm talking about, like autistic people with dyslexia, people with ADHD. They have this, the language they use is masking and camouflaging, right? That they need to act normal, act typical so that they can move through a day, right? So they won't be reprimanded, so that they can navigate things easier, so they can have their needs met. And one thing that they know, and that's really talked about a lot in that community, is how tired we are after a day of doing that. How tired we are after a day of constantly having to think, how is somebody perceiving this? Is my anger coming through? Is my inability to pay attention right now obvious to people? And how can I sort of position myself? Or, in the case of, like, not wanting to look angry, like, then we slap on these, like, kind of freakish smiles that don't, that aren't authentic to us. And that takes so much work, right? So then that ends up being a trauma, right? Not being able to be ourselves and having to put on personas for the benefit of other people, and for ourselves, right, to have our needs met. It's not a bad thing, but it is exhausting. It's really exhausting, and it adds to the exhaustion that we're already feeling. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that community, because they've done a lot of great work there, creating language around that.
Those are excellent examples, and I'm glad that you brought, the wonderful community of neurodivergent folks into this, because I think it's a really good example of what's going on. When I'm listening and I'm hearing so much stuff, and Cameron, you started it by saying, there's so many systems that tell us that we're garbage. And, Travis, you mentioned stuff about shame, and Jennifer, I didn't make notes of who said what. So it's like, we've all kind of brought in what's happening that's coming towards us. And I was thinking about how we, neurodivergent folks are masking or camouflaging. I think a lot of us are rebuffing the messages that we hear all the time, because people are telling us that we're garbage. People are telling us that we're going to lock you up because of who you are, or because of if you allow your kids to have hormones in Texas or wherever. People are telling trans folks, in the context of what we're talking about, that we're garbage. And so how do people not take that in? How can we, again, when we look at community, how can we help people not be devastated by that, not be exhausted by that, not have to always work on pushing that away, but maybe welcoming something else in instead of all of those messages. You can just solve the world with that question, please. No.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
No, you go, Cameron.
I mean, it is like, I think it is impossible to not take some of that in, right? You can try to, shut off the news and turn off Facebook and do all the things. But ultimately, I think we can't shield ourselves from the hate of the world. What we can do is, have love be louder. And again, finding communities, I think, that will affirm who you are. And I know that I need that. And I didn't know that I needed that until I had one, that truly was like, no, really, like, you are so loved and you are so exactly who you're supposed to be. And with that, I think when we have kind of this healthy spot of saying, like, I know who I am, that is garbage, like being able to say, actually, that is garbage, is that takes a lot of years and a lot of time. Because I know for much of my life, I thought I felt that way, but really in the back of my mind, I was still going like, well, but what if they're right? And so I think that there's a lot of healing work that needs to happen with other people. Again, there's that collective thing, to say, to remind me when I'm forgetting, to continue to push me to ask but how are you, right? All of those things really do need to continue to happen, because at any moment, I think some of that hurt can hit again. And so we need people to remind us, and we need to do the healing work to get to the point of saying, like, no, that is garbage. But then also, I think for me, again, I'll just keep going in on the like burning down of systems, right? Like, I think that there is then a responsibility of the community also to not only work on you as an individual, but to expand that then out to the collective, and to say, what can we do to make sure that, a trans kid in wherever the latest legislation also has connection to a community and to people who are standing up and saying, no, you are loved, you are known, you are seen. And I think there's a lot of work to do internal and, like, in a narrow way, but we have to be able to figure out ways to expand that out to say, we collectively stand against systems of oppression, and we're going to do something about that. Because I think we won't actually move past this until we do that. And a lot of people want to stop at the, like, oh, well, I hang out with my neighbor's kid, and like, that's good enough. And I think that is a step, and that is good. And I'm not downplaying that, but there is, I think, a bigger responsibility to say, like, liberation can only come when we all figure out a way to get free together. And some of that requires us to do something about it. So for me, those are things that I know I have needed and will continue to do.
Yes, all of that. And so Cameron said, have love be louder. And so one of the questions I have is, how do we feed love? How do we nourish love so it's louder? And I think in the framework, oftentimes, of within, among, and beyond, in terms of the levels at which I want to feed and nourish love. So like doing that internal work within, and then doing the among work, which is like the community, like the community nourishes love and says, you are beloved and amazing. And then there's that beyond work, which is some of what Cameron was talking about with legislation, with having the rules of how we live together affirm all human beings for their inherent worth. But I also think that even beyond that is knowing that the whole and the holy is very clear, that you are beloved, and that there is nothing and no one that will ever change that. And that message of love and holiness and wholeness applies to every single person in the world, and that it is irrevocable, and that it like there's no legislation can change that, because it is what is true. And I think feeding and nourishing that message of the wholeness, being really clear about every human being's love is important as well. That's part of the work that the church does, but it's something that we can do at a community level and within as well. Is just align those things so that remembering love is the strongest thing, and love never detaches from any human being, and then feed the messages and the understanding of love again and again at every level. And I have some ritual ideas too, but that might be too specific. I'm going to let Travis talk first, and then if we want to talk about ritual, I'll talk about that.
Yeah, we want to talk about ritual.
I want us all to remember, and particularly people that are listening, that there is something that takes that in. There is something that hears all of that and takes it in. And it didn't do that for nothing. It did it because that's how it learned how to be safe, right? So like, there's never any reason to shame that there's something in you that believes those things, because that's how you stayed safe for so long, right? And that's still how you might stay safe, right? This is a really light example, but I'm on the phone and I'm with the telephone company, and I'm just trying to get through my day. I'm trying to get something done, and I think, oh, should I say my husband or should I say my roommate? I don't know this person on the line. I don't know if this person is suddenly going to make my job harder because I'm just trying to like get the bill fixed. And I make a choice in that moment, right? What to do, because I have a right to be safe. So whatever it is that took that in was doing its very best and doing what it knew how to keep you safe. And so I think sometimes we can like double on the shame when we feel that, and we see something on TV or we read about that kind of hate and discrimination, and we take it in and we go, oh, I feel that. And then this like double shame comes in and says, oh, well, you're not supposed to feel that. You're supposed to love yourself. And why aren't you loving yourself? What's wrong with you? Well, we don't need that, right? Like, so there is something in us that took that in, and our corrective, our best course of action is to be really, really gentle with that part of us that took that in. That the part of us that believes that, to say like, I totally get why you did that. I totally get why you're doing that right now. And I'll just like, seems strange to say, to say sitting with yourself, but sitting with the thing that takes that in and believes it, and being in like, I can sort of bring in that that loving part, right? Like loving louder and saying like, well, I'll love you too, even though you're talking like those folks, right? To make that distinction, you don't have to have any love for the people saying it out there, right? In fact, we reject that and we say no to it, because it's not safe to say yes to that. But it is okay to say whatever in us that takes that in and sort of believes it and and struggles with it, to say like, well, I'll love that, and I'll be really, really gentle with that, no matter what, no matter how it talks to me, no matter what it believes about me. I think that's really important.
I love that. I love that there's love going on.
Yeah.
And Jennifer's going to talk about rituals. Will you talk about ritual?
So actually, that was a perfect segue. So like Travis is talking about the part of you that took this other thing in, right? And maybe inviting the love message in to come, or a part of yourself that is loving to sit with the part that took it in. And I was literally thinking of a visualization process, right? So to understand that the message, the hateful message is something that came from the outside, even if there's a piece of you that held on to it, it's an external object, and like to visualize that, and maybe like check in with the body and see if there's a place in the body that it's held, right? And if there's a part of you that's holding on to it, you could just ask that part, like, hey, what, would you be willing to set that down? Would you be willing to let go of that thing? And sometimes there's some conversation that needs to happen there, but literally like taking it out of your body. So I've done that with some of my own internal negative messages or whatever, like leaving the part of myself in there, whatever part of it was holding on to it, but being like, hey, could I have that black briefcase, or like that, whatever the thing, is that they're holding on to, and removing it from the body and just placing it elsewhere, right? Like, even if you need to keep it nearby because that piece needs it to be safe in case later they need to pick it up, that's okay, right? Like, but setting it aside, I've had people find a little box, some place that it can be stored and you can put it aside, and sometimes people want to bury it later, right? Or maybe you just leave it in the box and it's there later if you need it, but getting it out of the body and putting it external to you. And then the other thing that I've had people do is to visualize themselves as like a being that has spaciousness in it, and the messages come and then they go right through. So you don't have to spend the energy and the shielding energy, like, although I have done shielding as well. You can do a shielding visualization, but like if you have space, it's like, oh, you threw a nasty message at me. Guess what? It went through the spaciousness in my body and I visualize it going back out the other side and it lands in the dirt behind me, right? And some of that can just be about the relief that can come with imagining the thing not in the body anymore.
I think this is such a good opportunity to, because this is a panel about grief, that you can grieve for those parts, right? You can grieve for what has been lost by taking in those messages, right? Or having to do all that work to make sure that those messages go through you, because that's a lot of work, right? Like, that's time out of your day, and it's not fair, it's not right, it's really unjust, right? And so that's a real opportunity to make space for grieving that too, because I think that's part of that integration process, is saying, this is not right, something was lost here. And when we name what was lost and we make a special place for it, that becomes really sacred. That becomes a really, that helps us recognize our wholeness.
So I wanted to circle back to two things that I think are related. You all might not think are related. And then I want you all to have like a last kind of final thought, parting message, whatever you want to leave folks with. But the two things that I heard before that I think are connected, Cameron, you mentioned the "we got you." And you were referencing the clothing, kind of boutique, and the kind of the "we got you" piece of that. And I was thinking about that as kind of nurturing and solid and just there. And I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking, Jennifer, you mentioned joy and sparkling, and where there's that kind of magic, and it's kind of like these two things that are like both so important, but they almost feel like they're very far apart, but they also feel like they're right next to each other. And I'm just wondering if you all may have some comments about where do we get, or where do we tap into that "I got you" energy, and where can we, or how can we tap into the magic of the joy or the sparkle or the fairy dust or whatever that piece is for different people. And again, I think they go together. Y'all might not. And I don't know what the question is with that, but I just see them together. And if you all don't say anything, we're going to close then, because, you can
Well,
just say, nope, doesn't work.
I think that for me, there is sparkle magic in finding places that are like, we got you. Because there aren't a lot of those spaces. And that might be in a relationship that you just feel utterly safe in. And you can feel that like that both thing, that like, oh, you've got my back no matter what. And that feels like magic sometimes. Or it can be in communities, like I was saying with Zhao, it always feels like every Sunday I walk in, and no matter how tired or like literally had just done band practice and that didn't go well, and then we get in there and all of a sudden there's this energy that happens that one of my favorite people talks about, like unicorn glitter magic that happens, and it is there is something about connecting with one another that I think is that sparkle magic that is you can't put your finger on it, but it's there, and so I don't know, I agree with you. I think that they go together, and I think that when you are doing what you kind of mentioned earlier, Michael, of like, leveling the playing field, not having hierarchy, doing connection, and therefore saying like, we together, we've got this because we have enough. There is that magic that happens, and I am hopeful that everybody can feel that somewhere, and that we collectively work towards a world where more and more people are feeling exactly that.
I agree with Cameron that the sparkle magic is in relationship and is in community. And the only thing I would add is that finding a place, a community, a person, a place of people that says we got you can sometimes create enough safety for the nervous system to relax and therefore be able to access joy again. I think there's a nervous system safety thing that has to happen sometimes in order to really connect with real feeling. And sometimes it's joy and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's pain, but the system has to be relaxed enough to even feel the feelings. And I think communities that say we got you can help us do that.
Oh, I think we're on the same frequency here, because I was thinking that joy and pain live right next door to each other, right? And I'll take it down to the individual level again. Like, to say I got you can be said inward as well, right? Like that can be said to the self, I've got you, or to whatever is pain inside, right? And we try to do this thing, and it would be really nice if we actually could do it, but we try to go like, oh, well, this feeling is actually nice, like joy, happiness, contentment, like that's really nice. And we try to like yank it out of the rest of the stuff, but it actually lives in the muck too, right? Like they come together, they come as a package, pain and joy. And when we cut ourselves off from pain, we actually cut ourselves off from joy as well. So, but in order to be with our pain, we've got to say, I got this, I've got you, I'm willing to hold the pain. So there's a sequence there, right? And that's when we're able to really access the joy in ourselves. And I think when we're able to do that for ourselves, then we can go out into the world and say, and I got you, and I got you, and you've got me. And then there's, so it's a nice linking up the big and the small.
Excellent, really excellent. Thank you. Can we end with some magic thoughts, some non-magic thoughts, something that you want to leave people with, or a couple of things that you want to leave people with? Or do you want to leave it with what we just talked about? Because we just talked about magic and sparkles and messiness and mud and beautiful stuff.
I think the one thing I would want to leave people with is saying, you are beloved. You are beloved on this earth and you are inherently worthy.
Thank you.
I would say whenever you start to lose yourself or lose your place, stop. Don't charge forward, stop, and always come back to gentleness. Always, there's nothing inside of you that you cannot treat gently, and that you cannot treat lovingly. Like you're not forbidden from that at all. So whenever you lose your way, it's kind of like stop, drop, and roll. Or when you feel on fire, you stop, drop, and roll. You don't run around. You stop wherever you are. Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't like going last, but I think healing is possible. It's hard, but it's possible. And if you feel like you can't, there are people who can hold that I can't moment with you. And you're not alone. That honestly is the thing. You are not alone. And if you ever need anyone, please, I am here. I'm sure the other people on this panel would say they are here, but you are not alone. Healing is possible. And when you can't, we got you. We can hold it with you until you're ready to go on.
The three of you, I really thank you very much for showing up and being here. And I try to not ask very much, so please say no to me if I heard you all say, like, Michael asks and I say yes. Please say no to me sometimes, because that'll make us all feel better. But I really, really, really appreciate all of your wisdom and your thought and your reflection. I also wanted to thank our two ASL folks who are always amazing. So thank you for doing an amazing job. And Caleb in the background, who's also like rock solid. And I don't know what I would do without Caleb because he's rock solid. And the folks that showed up tonight and the folks that'll show up watching the video later. So thank you everybody for being here. And Caleb's gonna pop a evaluation in the chat and we'd love to hear your thoughts, and we listen and we pay attention to them. So take a moment if you can. So thanks everybody. Really enjoyed being here with you all tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.